On a spring morning in 1958, demolition crews arrived at 73rd and Riverside Drive to begin dismantling what had once been Manhattan's most expensive private home. Pink granite walls that had taken Italian stonemasons months to perfect would fall in hours. Mahogany panels from South American forests, hand-carved by artisans who'd spent years on single rooms, would become kindling or curiosity pieces in salvage yards. The Charles M. Schwab mansion represented something unique in American architecture, a 75-room testament to unlimited ambition built by a man who started with nothing. Yet 4 decades later, the palace stood empty and unwanted, its owner dead, his fortune evaporated, his monument to excess about to be replaced by a utilitarian apartment complex. In fact, when Andrew Carnegie first visited the completed mansion, the crusty Scotsman who ruled American industry spoke words that would prove prophetic. "Have you seen that place of Charlie's? It makes mine look like a shack." Carnegie's Fifth Avenue mansion still stands today as the Cooper Hewitt Museum. Schwab's superior palace exists only in photographs and a few salvaged doors installed in a Brooklyn church. In today's episode of Old Money Mansions, we explore how the finest residence ever built in New York City lasted barely 40 years before meeting the wrecking ball. Most New Yorkers who pass the Schwab apartments on Riverside Drive today have no idea they're walking past the ghost of American capitalism's greatest cautionary tale. Beneath those 636 nondescript units once stood a mansion so vast it contained its own power plant. So modern it featured air conditioning in 1906. So expensive it consumed a quarter of its owner's fortune on art alone. The man who built this vanished palace would die with barely enough money to bury himself. Charles M. Schwab came into the world in 1862 in Williamsburg, Pennsylvania, the son of a blanket manufacturer whose ambitions extended no further than the next order from Pittsburgh. The family lived modestly, young Charles learning early that money came hard and left easily in the boom and bust economy of industrial Pennsylvania. At 18, he took a job at Andrew Carnegie's Edgar Thomson Steelworks in Braddock, starting as a driver for $1 a day. The work was brutal, 12-hour shifts in heat that could drop a man in minutes, surrounded by molten metal and machinery that maimed the careless. But Schwab possessed something his fellow workers lacked, an ability to see beyond the furnace floor. Where others only saw labor, Schwab saw systems that could be improved, processes that could be streamlined, men who could be motivated rather than driven. He studied every aspect of steel production, memorizing the chemistry of different alloys, understanding the economics of procurement, learning the names and backgrounds of every worker in his section. Most importantly, he caught the attention of Andrew Carnegie himself. The Scottish industrialist, already on his way to becoming America's richest man, recognized in Schwab a kindred spirit, someone who understood that managing men mattered as much as managing machines. Carnegie began inviting the young foreman to meetings, testing his insights, grooming him for bigger things. By 1897, at age 35, Schwab had risen to president of Carnegie Steel Company, overseeing an operation that produced more steel annually than the entire nation of Great Britain. His salary reached heights that seemed impossible for a blanket maker's son, but Schwab was just beginning. In 1901, he orchestrated the deal that would create United States Steel Corporation, serving as an intermediary between Carnegie and J.P. Morgan in what would become the largest business transaction in world history, $480 million for Carnegie's empire. Morgan Schwab, the first president of U.S. Steel, at a salary of $2 million per year, at the time the highest executive compensation in America. But corporate life chafed at Schwab's international spirit. In 1903, he left to purchase Bethlehem Steel, a small Pennsylvania operation he would transform into the second largest steel producer in the nation. Bethlehem Steel under Schwab would forge the bones of modern America. Girders for the George Washington Bridge, armor plating for the Great White Fleet, beams for countless skyscrapers reaching toward the clouds. Meanwhile, in 1883, Schwab had married Emma Urana Dinky, a Weatherly, Pennsylvania girl who everyone called Rana. She adapted gracefully as her husband's fortune multiplied, learning to navigate New York society while maintaining the small-town warmth that had first attracted Charles. When he faced major decisions, like a $50 million offer for half of Bethlehem Steel, he sought her counsel first, treating her as a true partner in building their empire. Of course, behind the mahogany doors of Gilded Age mansions and marriages lay stories that would make even modern tabloid sites blush. Tales we save for our free Substack newsletter, where architecture meets the scandals these mansions concealed, like you're watching right now. But by century's turn, Schwab commanded a fortune approaching $40 million, $800 million in today's money. Indeed, the boy from Williamsburg had conquered American industry, and now he would build a palace to prove it. New York City in 1902 operated by rules as rigid as any medieval court, and Charles Schwab had broken most of them. His money was too new, his origins too humble, his manners too warm for the frosty descendants of Dutch and colonial merchants. Fifth Avenue's limestone mansions might as well have been fortresses, their doors closed to the steel man from Pennsylvania, no matter how many millions he commanded. Schwab's solution was typically direct. If Fifth Avenue wouldn't have him, he would build something that made Fifth Avenue irrelevant. He purchased an entire city block on Riverside Drive between 73rd and 74th Streets, a location that puzzled Manhattan's elites. Why build so far from the established corridors of wealth? Why choose the undeveloped West Side when he could afford any lot in the city? The answer lay in the space itself. Here Schwab could build without compromise, creating grounds that would dwarf the cramped lots of Millionaire's Row. Rana initially rebelled against the location. She had spent years cultivating relationships with the proper families, attending the right teas, supporting the correct charities. A move to Riverside Drive threatened to undo all of her work. "We'll be marooned," she told Charles, envisioning lonely nights in their palace while society gathered elsewhere. Her husband's response was characteristic. "Build something magnificent enough and they'll find their way to our door." For his architect, Schwab selected Maurice Hebert, a Beaux-Arts practitioner who had yet to design anything approaching this scale. It was a gamble, but Schwab had built his fortune on recognizing potential others missed. Together they conceived a French Renaissance chateau rendered in pink granite, a choice that set it apart from the gray limestone monotony of Fifth Avenue. Construction began in 1902 with a budget that made even robber barons surprised. $3 million for the structure, another $3 million for furnishings and art. The mansion would encompass 75 rooms, each one a showcase for craftsmanship that was already disappearing from modern construction. Over 100 artisans worked full-time for 4 years. Italian stone carvers, French muralists, Austrian metalworkers, each a master of traditions passed down through generations. And the details Schwab demanded seemed drawn from fantasy. A private chapel large enough to accommodate a full orchestra, a swimming pool lined with glazed brick that gleamed like jewels, a bowling alley meeting professional specifications, 6 elevators when most mansions made do with 1, a power plant in the basement, and of course air conditioning throughout, a technology so new that engineers had to invent solutions as they built. The art collection alone cost $50 million, a quarter of the total budget. Schwab even sent his tapestries to the 1904 World's Fair in St. Louis before installation, ensuring maximum publicity for his treasures. When Andrew Carnegie finally toured the completed mansion in 1906, the man who had built his own Fifth Avenue palace just years earlier could only stare in amazement. However, this gilded cage would soon prove to have a suffocating restrictiveness few could have predicted. Life inside the completed Schwab mansion bore little resemblance to the domestic harmony Charles had promised Rana. The palace designed to conquer New York society instead became a stage for spectacular self-destruction. The early years brought parties that entered Manhattan legend. Schwab would welcome 500 guests at a time, orchestras filling the chapel with music while visitors wandered through rooms containing more art than most museums. The steel magnate played perfect host, personally conducting tours of his bowling alley, demonstrating the swimming pool's innovative filtration system, showing off elevators that ran smoother than those in the city's best hotels. Champagne arrived by the case, food by the truckload, flowers by the greenhouse. Yet even as Schwab entertained half of New York in his public rooms, his private life was disintegrating. The appetites that drove him to build the impossible mansion extended to pleasures that destroyed rather than created. Gambling consumed him with particular ferocity. At Monte Carlo in 1903, he literally broke the bank. The casino ran out of money to cover his winnings and had to close his table. The stories made headlines worldwide, cementing Schwab's reputation as a man who did everything to excess. What the papers didn't report was how quickly those winnings vanished, or how many millions more followed them onto gaming tables across Europe. Private clubs in New York knew Schwab as the man who would bet on anything: cards, horses, business ventures, the weather. He lost with the same enthusiasm he brought to making steel, except losses brought no useful product, built no bridges, and created nothing but debt. Then there were the women. Affairs that started as flirtations at business dinners evolved into relationships Schwab barely attempted to conceal. When he fathered a child outside his marriage, the scandal reached even Rana in her third-floor sanctuary. The household staff whispered about late-night visitors and unexplained absences while pretending not to notice their mistress's tears. Rana's response was complete withdrawal. The woman who had worried about being isolated socially now embraced it, refusing invitations from even the most prestigious addresses. She declined White House dinners, ignored charity galas, stopped attending the opera. The society matrons who had finally accepted her now found their calling cards returned unopened. As Rana retreated from the world, her body changed. The slim Pennsylvania girl grew heavy, finding comfort in food when everything else failed. Cruel gossip followed. The same women who whispered about Charles's affairs now mocked Rana's weight, adding humiliation to heartbreak. In 1907, war gave the mansion brief purpose. Rana opened its doors to the Red Cross, letting its ballrooms serve the war effort. For a few months, the palace-built parties hosted a nobler cause. But 1929 would bring a different kind of devastation, one that no amount of charity work could prevent. Charles Schwab entered the 1920s with every reason for optimism. Bethlehem Steel was booking record profits, America was building skyscrapers at unprecedented speed, and his company's girders formed the skeleton of the nation's growth. Yet beneath the corporate success, Schwab's personal finances were hemorrhaging money at a rate that would have bankrupted several smaller companies. The gambling that once amused him now controlled him. No longer content with friendly wagers at New York clubs, Schwab sought higher stakes in European casinos where million-dollar losses barely raised eyebrows. He played not for pleasure, but from compulsion, chasing losses with bigger bets, convinced that one spectacular win would restore everything. His solution to mounting debts was always the same: borrow against future earnings and trust that tomorrow's fortune would cover today's losses. Friends who had marveled at his earlier Monte Carlo triumph now watched in horror as he threw away sums that would have built factories or endowed universities. By 1925, whispers circulated through Manhattan's financial district that Charles Schwab, the boy wonder who had risen from nothing, was broke. Not publicly broke, Bethlehem Steel still paid him handsomely, but personally, catastrophically in debt. The fortune once estimated at $40 million had vanished into casino vaults and bad investments. October 29, 1929, arrived with the force of a steel furnace explosion. The stock market crash that had launched the Great Depression found Schwab particularly vulnerable. His remaining investments, leveraged to cover the gambling debts, evaporated within hours. Bethlehem Steel stock plummeted from $140 to $8 per share. The company would survive. Steel was too essential to disappear, but Schwab's personal holdings were wiped out. By 1932, the mansion on Riverside Drive had become an impossible burden. Property taxes alone ran to thousands per month, while maintenance costs for 75 rooms, 6 elevators, and pioneering air conditioning systems drained what little cash remained. Schwab listed his palace for $4 million, roughly $71 million in today's currency, a fraction of what he'd spent building it. No buyers materialized, for who in Depression-era America could afford such a monument to excess? The very magnificence that made the mansion famous now made it impossible to sell. For 7 more years, Schwab inhabited his empty palace like the last resident of a condemned city. Rana had retreated so completely that the servants reported not seeing her for months at a time. The couple who had built this monument to success now existed as shadows within its walls. In 1936, New York's mayor toured the property as a potential city acquisition. After walking through the marble halls and golden rooms, he dismissed it as grandiose for any government function. By 1939, Schwab could no longer pretend. At 77, broken in health and spirit, he packed his few remaining possessions and moved to a modest Park Avenue apartment, leaving the pink granite palace empty, a $6 million ghost waiting for the wrecking ball. Charles M. Schwab died on the 18th of September 1939 of heart disease in a 2-bedroom Park Avenue apartment that would have fit inside his mansion's swimming pool room. The man who once commanded $40 million left an estate valued at less than $300,000. After debts and taxes, his widow Rana inherited exactly $200, insufficient to purchase even one of the mahogany doorknobs from their abandoned palace. Rana lingered for an additional 4 years until 1943, her final years spent in the kind of modest circumstances she had known as a girl in Weatherly, Pennsylvania. With both Schwabs gone, their Riverside Drive mansion entered a strange purgatory, too expensive to maintain, too magnificent to repurpose, too valuable as land to preserve. For nearly 5 years, the empty palace stood like a pink granite question mark against the Manhattan skyline. Various proposals emerged for the property's future. Convert it to apartments. The cost of subdividing these soaring spaces and installing modern plumbing throughout would exceed any potential rental income. Transform it to a school. The chapel-sized rooms and marble halls made no sense for classrooms. A museum? New York already had enough repositories for Gilded Age excess. The city briefly considered acquisition, but even government bureaucrats recognized the impossibility of maintaining such a white elephant. In 1947, economics rendered the verdict that sentiment could not contest. The land beneath Schwab's palace, an entire city block of prime Manhattan real estate, was worth far more than any building, however magnificent. Demolition would begin the following year. When wrecking crews arrived in early 1948, they discovered that Schwab had built for eternity. Pink granite blocks fitted by Italian masters resisted modern machinery. Walls that had risen in months required weeks to topple. The mahogany panels, each one representing months of hand carving, splintered under crowbars wielded by men who earned in a year what those panels had cost per foot. Salvage teams rescued what they could. The mansion's massive mahogany doors, carved with designs that would never be replicated, went to Brooklyn's Our Lady of Lebanon Cathedral. Parishioners who had never even heard of Charles Schwab now walked through his doors to pray. By 1950, the transformation was complete. Where America's most expensive private residence stood, developers erected a 19-story building containing 636 rental units. They named it Schwab House, apparently without irony. Red brick replaced pink granite. Efficiency superseded grandeur. And $300 monthly rents generated what $6 million in construction never could. Steady profit. In 1984, the building converted to cooperatives, with apartments selling for sums Charles Schwab would have spent on a single dinner party. Today's residents likely have no idea they live where 75 rooms once showcased humanity's greatest craftsmanship. The boy from Williamsburg, who conquered American steel, built New York's most opulent mansion, and lost everything to cards and dice, left behind only a building number and some repurposed doors, fitting monuments to the impermanence of American fortune. And now I'd love to see you in the comments. Do you believe that New York should have found a way to preserve Schwab's mansion? Or was demolition inevitable with such an impractical large structure in prime real estate on Manhattan? I look forward to hearing from you, and with that said, thanks for joining us for another episode of Old Money Mansions, and we'll see you on the next one. Cheers.